The Lowe Post is brought to you by Goodyear, helping you discover the road ahead. Goodyear, more driven. How does 25-year-old two-time MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo get drafted 15th overall in a weak draft class? Our own Adrian Wojnarowski investigates the twists and turns that led to a franchise and league-altering selection way back in 2013. A three-part series that tells this unique story, including interviews with individuals close to the process, as well as a one-on-one sit-down with Giannis himself. Check out the Woj Pod special, The Giannis Draft, wherever you find your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on a Monday morning after Thanksgiving weekend. I hope you all had a jolly and safe Thanksgiving holiday, and the NBA offseason is basically over, minus one or two pieces of business, including the biggest piece of business in the entire league up in Milwaukee. We'll see what happens with that. To help us take stock today with a focus on the Eastern Conference and a little, try-hard franchise that is close to our hearts, I'm thrilled to welcome back after a long, by his standards, Lowe Post hiatus, one of my favorite guests, the very first guest ever on this podcast, the great Kevin Arnovitz. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. I missed it. I missed the grammar. I missed all of it. How was Thanksgiving? Did you keep it? Did you keep it tight? Did you keep it safe? Did you cook a turkey?
I cooked a duck, but we have a 9-week-old golden retriever puppy, so that was the main event. It is an all-consuming affair. So that was our Thanksgiving.
Can you reveal can you reveal the puppy's name?
His name is Howard.
Okay,
his name is Howard.
How did we pick that?
I think we both like old guy names. So it was sort of in the Marvin, Melvin, Howard. I have a dear uncle who sort of a big brother to me who passed away in 2014. So it did a little honor. But my life has never been more captive by another creature's defecation cycle than it is right now. Like he's a love muffin. Golden retriever puppies are insanely cute.
I love dogs. Love dogs. Love the idea of a dog. Love petting other people's dogs. Love when they jump on me. Love everything about a dog. They're better than cats. I don't want to hear any argument for cats. Cats are snooty. We've talked about this before. Dogs love you and they show you their love. Nothing will push you off the idea of acquiring your own dog more than waking up really early for whatever reason, walking out of your apartment building at 6 a.m. on a freezing cold winter day and seeing a miserable looking dude smoking a cigarette and picking up his dog's poop. Like that would, like, you see that once, you're like, you know what? Not for me. Other people can do it. I'm not going to do it.
We sort of look at it like the process, like it's Philly the first 2 years, right? Like, it's endearing. It's adorable. They are going to lose every time you go into the building, but you're building for something greater. And then there's that moment where a 3-year-old golden is in your life and he's independent. And you got to take him out every 4 hours. You walk him. It's 78 degrees here, but the first 2 seasons are just pure investment. And that's sort of how I'm looking at this dog. And it'll be wonderful and loving and endearing. And we're going to lose a lot of games. He has already done that several times on our living room floor. So
best Thanksgiving side dish. Best Thanksgiving side dish. What is it?
I'm like a butternut squash guy.
Ooh.
I don't like any of the standards. I'm not.
Wow.
I like butternut squash, a little brown butter. That's just freaking fallish. It's great. I think it should replace the yam in the rotation.
I feel outclassed. I feel like I arrived to the party underdressed or something. I was just going to say stuffing. The stuffing is polarizing. One of my friends yesterday was saying they don't like stuffing. I'm like, stuffing is like bread and herbs and spices. Like, what is not to like about that? And for me, it's stuffing and cranberry sauce. Pumpkin pie, yes or no?
Yes.
Hard no on pumpkin pie. We can't ever have Thanksgiving together. Pumpkin pie is not even a top 10 pie. It's not even close.
See, I have controversial turkey views, and I've aired these on Twitter back when I was actually on Twitter, which is turkey's BS, man. The only reason we eat turkey is because it was like the only thing here in the 17th century. And it's dry. And when you go to other great culinary countries, like when's the last time you went to you saw on a French or an Italian or Japanese menu turkey? Nobody eats turkey. We eat it because it was gobbling around in New England. It was the only wild species. They had to eat something other than tree bark. And now we're subject to this just awful.
Let me push back on your
protein.
your anti-American. I'm just going to call it what it is: anti-American turkey hate. Number one, many years ago in San Antonio during the finals, you and I were part of a group that went on a barbecue field trip, and the highlight of the barbecue field trip was the turkey, because we had such low expectations for the San Antonio area barbecue turkey that when we got it, it was delicious and juicy, and it was incredible. Number two, my wife, because we did Thanksgiving solo for the first time, cooked the turkey, and guess what? It came out not dry. It came out everyone's least favorite word in the English language. It came out moist. Let me say it again, moist. So I don't want to hear your turkey hate. Let's forget enough turkeys. Enough turkeys. Let's talk about the try hard, feel good franchise that you and I have both had a soft spot for many years now, and I think one of the, if not the most interesting teams in free agency, the Atlanta Hawks, who clearly after 3 losing seasons and pretty deep pain losing seasons, had a mandate from the top to compete for the playoffs. And they had oodles of cap space, more than anybody else. They used it to sign Danilo Gallinari to a 3-year, $60 million deal, which very importantly, and kind of slipped under the radar, only $5 million guaranteed in the 3rd season. Bogdan Bogdanovic, after the Bogdan Bogdanovic fiasco in Milwaukee, on a 4-year, $72 million offer sheet. Chris Dunn, 2 years, $10 million via the room exception. Rondo, 2 years, $15 million. Drafted Onyeka Okongwu. And who am I missing? I'm probably even missing something else. They were so active. John Collins remained eligible for an extension. Yeah. Just a lot of stuff happened.
Solomon Hill,
Solomon Hill,
10th, 11th guy. I don't know if they'll hang on to Snell.
Tony Snell in the Tony Snell Deadman Stretch Fest 2020 for the Pistons. So sort it all out for me. This team clearly wants to make the playoffs. And by the way, one of the things that we keep forgetting is like making the playoffs is now different. Like 7 to 10, you're in the play-in tournament. Like I keep thinking in my head, the Hawks are the favorites for the 8th seed. Have the Hawks made themselves the favorite to the 8th seed? Can they get the 7th seed? I'm like, wait a second. The 8th seed, yeah, it's an important advantage. You can win once to get into the playoffs rather than having to win twice. You can lose. You have a margin for error to lose in the play-in tournament, but you're not even guaranteed to make the playoffs. I have to recalibrate my brain. So, Mr. Arnovitz, what thinks you of the Atlanta Hawks, both their outlook for this season and whether this was their optimal use of resources going forward?
Yeah, I mean, starting with a macro, right? Like this was kind of a laughingstock franchise from my childhood after the Dominique errors till, the Bruce Levinson debacle and forward, right? There's always been this notion, and I sort of subscribe to it, this is a sleeping giant of a franchise because Atlanta is an exceedingly appealing place for NBA players. Not only do a disproportionate number of them kind of grow up within 2-3 hours of Atlanta, you can fly there obviously from anywhere, but it's a great city for like young athletes. There's a reason many of them spend their off seasons there. Okay, so now we have new ownership. They're committed materially, but they do this sort of Philadelphia thing, right? Like we're even going to bring in Lloyd Pierce. You have a long runway. We're not going to specify how long that runway is, but it's long until it's not. I think they got seduced a little bit by that nice March in 2019, where it was like, hey, we're closer than we think. But I also thought they were kind of admirably restrained. We're not going to talk because I don't think we need to litigate the Luka thing anymore, right? Like this is what it is. It's Trey and Cam Reddish for Luka Doncic. There will always be a little part of me that died inside as a Hawks fan, waiting for a Luka my entire life.
You have to talk about it a little bit because...
All right, let's talk about it a little bit. Like,
you have to talk about it only in that it's not going to work out. Like, Dallas is going to win the trade, period.
Yes.
End of story. And, Trey Young is really good. He could be a transformative offensive player. He's just not Luka. And so all of this, all the machinations, all the moves, all of everything is not necessary. All the rushing is not necessary if you have Luka Doncic. The path forward is much clearer to you. It's much simpler. It has much more flexibility built into it. You don't have to be hell-bent on where do I find defenders to surround Trey Young. And not that Luka's a plus defender or anything, but it's not the same. So, yes, we don't need to litigate it. The litigation is over. The jury has come back. There might be one holdout somewhere. They have to go back into the meeting room for a couple more hours, a couple more nights sequestered at the hotel, whatever. But it does have ripple effects that at least we have to acknowledge. So that's all I think we should say.
Right. Yeah, and the verdict is here, guilty. Right? like they lost the trade. I think this is a really interesting and good use of resources. As you said, the mandate has come from the top. Both management and coach are kind of on the spot this year. I'm not going to talk about temperatures of seat, but there is a mandate that it is time. It is time. I like what they did in this respect. In terms of how do you allocate your resources, do you really spend it on Danilo Gallinari for 2 years? As you say, the third year is sort of marginal in terms of commitment. You look at 2021, I think there's always this sense when you're an aspirational team, like, let's save our cap space. We'll be in the sweepstakes. And that's like, if you go down the 21 free agency list, who's going to Atlanta? And I don't mean this as a knock on the organization. Like, Paul George is not walking through that door away from LA, right? Like, none of the top tier free agents are going to walk through that door. So how do you start aggregating not just future assets, but present assets, your young guys, tradable contracts, and, oh, by the way, win along the way? And I think this is a really interesting and good way to do it. I think Bogdanovich is an electrifying piece. I think the team is going to be a lot of fun. Gallinari is, I don't know if he's a sixth man for them. He's sort of can be a sort of productive 3-4. By the way, they're swimming in fours right now. We can talk a little about that positionally. You still have sort of, let's see how it materializes with Hunter. I think Reddish is fascinating, and we can talk about him sort of as a player. I think he could end up their like very strong second best player before this is all over.
He had a really nice finishing kick to the suspended season that feels like ancient history. It's hard to even remember what it looked like, but it was as you said it in reference to their 2019, when they were like 11-13 over their last 24 games or whatever, got everyone so excited. Some of those late season things are like, you can't read all that much into it. You have to watch to figure out what's real and what's the product of playing a shitty schedule against tanking teams. The Cam Reddish development felt like, okay, this is a guy who, long way to go, shooting a big question mark, blah, blah, blah. But after X amount of months has found a way to digest and absorb the speed and athleticism and rhythms of the NBA game that overwhelmed him and has responded. That felt real to me.
Yeah. The improvement in, and this is an abstract term that I've come to really love, like feel. Right, like the improvement in feel over the season. There's a steep learning curve there that you're watching on a nightly basis with Atlanta that is really impressive, right? By the way, the shooting, this is a guy who's 80% from the line and isn't the sort of the general criteria that, if a guy has a really good shot at the line, he has the potential, even though he's never been, I think, above like 33-34% either at Duke or Atlanta. So, but I'm sort of hopeful there, and maybe there's a rational exuberance, but this guy should be a very decent shooter. I don't know that he's a 40 guy, but he should be a 37-38 if you base it on sort of the stroke at the line, which I think is around 80%. So, that's where I'm totally hopeful. I also think he's a plus defender eventually. Like, I think he's kind of I think he's, there's really, again, the feel kind of translates to the defensive side. Like, I think he's decent enough laterally, but he's really good at the anticipation. The other thing is Capella. Right? Like, Atlanta will tell you, hey, that was our biggest free agent acquisition because we kind of, in the dark of night, without much fanfare. In fact, we all analyzed the trade from the Houston side. None of us analyzed it from the Atlanta side. By the way, like, I think, so here's what I like about it. A rim runner with Trae Young is potentially really dangerous. Right? Like, number two, I never thought Capella is an all NBA defender. I think he's a little overrated defensively, but he's a hell of a lot better what they've had. Right? Yeah, he's not going to embarrass himself on the switch. He's not on, when he's an Islander, he's not on roller skates. He can do, by the way, in any meaningful game, he's not going to be on the floor at the end unless you're playing a more conventional.
I'm not sure that's true. Capella?
You think?
Well, I think I think it's interesting because everyone, and I'll include myself, has been, I think, a little over fixated on the positional overlap surrounding John Collins, right? And that's a big name that we haven't really mentioned yet. Like, John Collins, well, he plays a lot of four. You just brought in Danilo Gallinari, who, probably needs to play a lot of four. And DeAndre Hunter played some four last year. Well, okay, shift John Collins to the five. Oh, wait a second. You just traded a first-round pick for a five in Capella, who can't play any other position. I think that stuff is real. I think the rush to get John Collins out of Atlanta, where's he going? Are they going to trade him? Are they not going to extend him? I think that's been a little premature. In fact, I would bet they do extend him before the season. I think they will come. If I had to predict, I would predict they come to an agreement. And also, like, talent is talent. Like, yeah, the fit's not perfect, but talent is talent. And so, like, on some nights, Danilo Gallinari can play a decent amount of three around John Collins and Clint Capella. Like, against some teams that don't have dynamic wing, like, he can guard even OG Anunoby. He can guard, whoever the Wizards, the Knicks, the Hornets.
Now Reddish is off the floor, though.
Well, we'll talk about lineups and all that, but, like, yeah. I just think you can survive with him defending threes on a lot of nights. On some nights against, Brooklyn or Boston or whatever, it's going to be tougher sledding for him. And the same thing with Collins Capella. Like, they'll find a way to play together. Capella, I thought, lost a little bit of athleticism toward the end in Houston. Like, he wasn't as airtight on switches as he used to be, but he's pretty damn good. I think this team here, I don't even know what their starting lineup is going to be. I would predict this, I think. Like you mentioned Reddish, my best shot at it would be Trae Young. I think Bogdanović walks in as the starting two. Hunter, yes. Collins, Capella. Gallinari, Travis Schlenk talked about it, came in with the idea of he's going to come off the bench and be the sixth man, which you normally don't pay $20 million a year for that, but fine, whatever. We talked about their cap situation. Like, I think that's a good way, in addition to the Rondo signing, a good way to stabilize the minutes where Trae Young didn't play when their offense went into the completely. I think, again, talent is talent, and I think, that relegates Herter to a bench role, Reddish to a bench role, or Hunter to a bench role if you prefer starting Reddish. I actually think that's okay for a year or two to slow the development of the young guys or to expose them to more advantageous situations as reserves. Chase some wins now. It's not like you're benching those guys completely. Like, they're still going to play. They're still going to play decent minutes. I think you can thread the needle a little bit in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is Hunter's the kind of guy who theoretically I love. He's a terrible ball handler right now. He's a great defender. I think he's more suited for the four, particularly if you're going to have Capella out there. Like, it is as much as Trae Young can kind of drain shots from 37 feet. And obviously Bogdanović, is a really good shooter. I mean, at some point you can have up front, you need to have a little stretch. I mean, Collins is actually a really nice shooter.
Collins shot 40% from three. He shot 40% from three last season.
So I kind of have four scenarios for Collins, right? One is, and I agree with you, they agree to a number. Obviously Collins is not a max player as much as I think he and his team kind of, wanted that, or his team. There's no extension, and they look for serious trade options. And I think you can, and it's great because even if for a team that trades for him, you can still control him in free agency, right? This isn't Andre Drummond. Number three, no extension, and you work together for a sign and trade. Or for the old Clippers, a la Corey Maggette, Elton Brand, you don't pay him, you see what he can get in the restricted market, and you match. And just, kind of assume that there is less of a market for John Collins. I think all it takes is one. So I'm with you. I think they'll come to a number. I just kind of have a sense of it. So I think you and I agree on that one. But it's sort of a fascinating game.
The only thing that I wonder, I think the Bogdanović contract is fine. I think he fits their team great in this respect. If they start him at the 2 or even the 3, but probably the 2, I just love, like Kevin Herter made strides as a secondary ball handler. We talked about Reddish. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure those guys are quite ready to play that role in a way that is dynamic enough to accomplish what I really want to see accomplished, which is get Trae Young moving off the ball a little bit. Like, we hold him up to this standard of Curry, which is not fair. Curry is the all-time off-ball threat. There are very few guys with his level of on-ball talent who are going to embrace that cutting, screening, getting other guys open role the way he has. It's just his DNA is special. Steph Curry's a special player. He's a special guy, and he's embraced that role. I do think it would be healthy for Trae Young to tap into that a little bit. I think it would help his teammates feel more involved on offense. I do think there is a shelf life to being like James Harden and the Hardenaires, like Trae Young and the Traeettes or something, like everyone just standing around watching the Trae show. And I think he could be devastatingly effective doing that kind of stuff. And to do that, you need another ball handler who really has the respect of defenses, who's a crafty playmaker, who's a threat to score and score from 3 levels. And I think Bogdanović can be that for them. I like that signing. He's only 28. He's a little older than their guys. Fine. Like, you don't get to, build the perfect team all the time, age-wise, position-wise. The Gallinari one is interesting to me because the fit is going to cause some ripple effects. As much as I just said talent is talent, The fit isn't as clean, and it's not just 2021 cap space. Yeah, they're missing out on that. Who cares? Nobody's coming. Depending a little bit on what happens with Collins, it's essentially could be like cap space for a long, long time, because Collins' number will hit, then Trey's number will hit. All the team options on guys like Hunter and Reddish are like $8, $9, $10 million bills by the end. Those guys then flip into bigger deals. Like, they could really just be out of cap space for indefinitely. I mean, obviously you can change your roster, you can move off guys, you can do this and that, but it was their last kind of bite at it potentially. And I just wonder, if they just signed Bogdanovich, how many wins are you losing out on if you demur on Gallinari and sort of sign a couple of spare parts here and there in his place? And obviously they had the cap space to do much more. You have to hit the floor, all that. But Danilo's a good player. He's a really good offensive player. Defensively, I think he gets exposed a little bit in the playoffs. That's the one that I'm sort of like, I want to see how it works a little bit.
Well, this is the other thing, and we've talked about nobody's coming. The other thing I really like about this this sort of spreadsheet now is, if at any point an all-star becomes disappointed with their situation, wants out, wants to be moved, you now have the ability to aggregate, I don't like to use the word assets, but aggregate talent, good contracts, desirable pieces to make a move for a guy like that. And again, if you can create the sort of environment where being traded to this place is not Siberia, right? Where, hey, you're going to play alongside Trae Young, which may or may not be an alert.
I can tell you organizationally,
you have certain conversations, right?
One thing they're happy about is they heard the noise that people will not come to play with Trae. They heard it, and they are happy that people came to play with Trae. And like, some of it is the money, like maybe a lot of it is the money, but Bogdanovich coming and Danilo coming have sort of at least neutered that noise, which was, I think, a little early and a little premature, but it was definitely out there. And I do think there are some players who I viewed that as, I think I'd rather go somewhere where I'd have the ball a little bit more. Like, I don't think Atlanta, for instance, was ever real for Gordon Hayward. And in Charlotte, he's going to be able to have the ball quite a bit. But guys did come. They did come. Those guys are good players. Like, you can't sneeze at that. Again, they're not Kawhi, they're not PG, whatever. But like, those guys are good, and they had a lot of interest around the league.
Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to think this way, but there's also something to be said with the log jam at the 4, that it can be a good stress test for younger guys. A certain complacency can set in if a younger player knows he's just inheriting the position rather than competing for that mantle. And I think that, but there is going to be, I mean, there's going to be there. This is a young roster that is going to have to be patient, right? Because not all of them, you just listed a lineup that doesn't have Cam Reddish in it, right? Maybe Cam's okay with that.
Or Herter,
right? We haven't even talked about Herter.
Who's the starter?
Right? This was a
who
guy
has been a starter.
Yeah. So, there's that. And, Hunter is sort of searching for a position. I just don't think he's a 3 long term, unless he can, establish. I mean, the other thing about your sort of secondary ball handler, like, I think Reddish, like, he's a great slasher. He's a good passer, and I think he'll get better. There's just a lot of, it's funny. I went from a Cam skeptic, and then I started watching basketball, and it was like, oh, I get it.
He gets places. Yes. When he gets going, he's got spin moves. And his spin moves are forceful. Like, he has forceful moves that don't just take up space. He gets north, south. Now, sometimes I can get you out of control. You're moving too fast. Like, that's a typical young player thing. But I thought the development for him was real. We haven't even talked about Chris Dunn, who will also, I would suspect Chris Dunn will be almost a full-time wing for them. Between Trae Young and Rondo, I don't see a lot of Chris Dunn running the offense as point guard kind of minutes, and he kind of fell out of that role in Chicago anyway. But defensively, that dude is an absolute monster. And yes, his three-point shot has never come, but he shot a career best from the rim last season, and I believe from mid-range as well. I'll look that up shortly. Like, he's going to get minutes on their team, and he made my all-defense team. He's an absolute delight to watch on defense. He will get into your jersey. He will make you regret stepping on the court if you can't handle the ball at an expert level. So let's talk about just sort of...
Question
go ahead.
for you on Dunn. I want to ask you a question on Dunn. So all we hear in this game, we talk to coaches, we talk to assistant coaches, defense at the point of attack, right? Like this is a pick and roll league. A guy like Dunn is kryptonite, right? Obviously offensively deficient. Why was there no market for this guy? Because it goes against everything you're saying. And I mean, Zach, I think you have excellent taste in basketball personnel. And I think if you value the guy, I would imagine the league should sort of value the guy. And there's no market for this guy. Like it just, there was none. And I'm shocked. Because
by the way, I'm totally wrong. Just to clarify, he shot 65% at the rim, which was by far a career high. 18% on long twos, which is obviously not a career high for Chris Dunn. Yeah, I don't. I was talking about this with somebody yesterday because the Bulls' new front office took a little flack for not showing any interest in Chris Dunn and Shaq Harrison too, who's a player that made my Luke Walton All-Stars at least once, and is another guy who's an absolute freak athlete. Zach LaVine told me on my podcast there's only one guy on this team who can compete with me athletically, running, jumping, all that, and you'll never guess who it was. And I already knew the answer because I had done some legwork on it. It's Shaq Harrison. I do think there's a sort of bias among diehards like us to fetishize the guys who are like, oh, like no one's watching Chris Dunn but like 75 crazy Bulls fans and us. And like, oh, Shaq Harrison, like almost nobody saw this guy's like 650 minutes last year, but I did. And like, I spotted a couple things that are interesting. And my God, the Bulls just dropped the ball. I can't believe the Bulls don't watch Shaq Harrison and Chris Dunn. And it's like, you step back and you're like, like it's really not that big a deal. The Bulls don't watch
funny Shaq Harrison story. It's not a story. Kind of fact about Shaq Harrison. When things really started to go sideways, let's not even call them sideways, downhill in Phoenix, in the Ryan McDonough era, one of the things that really pissed off ownership was going to a preseason game and watching Shaq Harrison as their point guard and just said, enough. And this is obviously a few years ago, but it was like Shaq Harrison was the catalyst for real conflict in Phoenix because he personified what at the time ownership saw as just awful planning at that position.
Let's zoom out and talk about where we think the Hawks fit in the East. I will just ask you directly. Are they a playoff team? Where do you see them?
Yeah, because I mean, just excluding them for a second, I have Milwaukee, Boston, Philly, Brooklyn, Miami, and probably Toronto. I'm sort of, they probably going to appear on my all-confusing team just because I think it might be like one of those burp years for a franchise that's great and certainly going places.
A burp year?
Yeah, because a consolidation year, as our friend John Hollinger always said, is sort of that it's generally reserved for a younger team. I don't think of Toronto as a younger team that is sort of building their roster. They had a little like this might be a consolidation year for the Memphis Grizzlies. Burp year is sort of they lost some key pieces. Many of their core guys are there. They're probably worse this year than they are last year. They're not going into the toilet. It's they'll regroup. They'll be cap space. And
this is the basketball equivalent of a burp.
Yeah, it's just sort of
not a hiccup, but a burp, specifically a burp.
What? All right, let's call it like a hiccup burp hybrid. But we'll talk about that on the all confusing. So those are the six, but I have Atlanta right there. I mean, Orlando is always the most one of the more competent defensive teams. They play themselves into 500ness, which in the East, as we know, is generally enough. And I have sort of Charlotte because because I think JB is a really good coach. And I think they have enough there now to, win games they're supposed to win. And if you do that in the East, you're looking at, and I always need to calibrate the new 70-win season. I think you're looking at 34 wins right there and, just off the bat. And then Chicago is sort of a mystery guess to me. Theoretically, I like Chicago, but there. So I have Atlanta, Orlando, Charlotte is sort of my 7, 8, 9 with Atlanta, probably the class of the field. So I have them right there hosting a play-in game with, look, if all things hit. The one thing, Zach, and we'll talk about it later, is there's a mystery here for the entire league, which is COVID. One key guy goes down, that's 12 days minimum, right? So you're talking about 5 games in a 72-game season. And that's assuming the guy's asymptomatic and on day 13, hey, he's back to 100%. You can speak to this. I just think we're going to be looking at a world where, oh, crap, 3 of their top 5 starters are out right now. And in that world, all of these prognostications are just out the window.
Well, yeah, I just don't have the bandwidth right now. This year has sucked so hard that I just don't. We all know, we've seen what's happened in football. We saw what happened in baseball. The Broncos, I don't know what the hell happened to who they ended up starting at quarterback yesterday. Talking to teams over the weekend, they're sort of budgeting in like 3 weeks. It could be 3 weeks for a player who tests positive when you consider that they're going to be away from basketball activities. You don't know if you're going to hit that, short timetable. The 10, 12-day timetable really seems optimistic. And like you said, a couple guys get it, and that's your season. The way the schedule is going to be compressed, very likely, like it could be a lot of games. And yeah, it's there and it sucks, and there's no more bubble, at least for now, and this is real life, and there's only so much you can do. But I tiered the East just like you did. I have a top tier that is 6 teams. Boston, I think, took a step back in playoff equity with Hayward leaving, but I think regular season, people are freaking out a little too much. Like, Boston's going to be really good. Miami, hey man.
Miami. I'm sorry. I forgot. By the way, I have Miami. I just completely looked over on the list. Which, by the way, I did say them, right? Yeah.
You've heard the noise. I don't know. It doesn't matter. You've heard the noise as much as I have that there are skeptics around the league. Like, oh, that was a bubble. Fluke maybe too strong. And, Miami is like the military. They were well suited.
Real quick fact. Before I get in trouble, the Indiana Pacers are in that sort of secondary group because I will hear it all day.
We're editing this out, so it looks like you snubbed the Pacers. By the way, Dan, take care.
Right, because I will never hear. And by the way, I love the Pacers organization.
No, all of this is being edited out. It doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want. It's not your podcast. You snubbed the Pacers. Miami, you've heard it. Like, they're the military. They were well suited for the bubble. All the things that undid some of these other teams. Miami was well built to withstand. I think Miami's just freaking good. And you want to, maybe they were well suited to the bubble. Nothing I saw in the bubble other than Goran Dragic's play. Let's assume he's 80 to 90% of what he was in the bubble. Nothing struck me as they can't carry that over into the way they play, the style, the guys who were doing it. Yeah, Jimmy Butler had a couple outrageous games, but I think Miami's legit and a legit threat to win the East. Dismiss them at your peril. Brooklyn, we all have to see Durant, right? Like, other players who have played with Durant this summer are like, holy smokes, he looks incredible. He looks athletic. He looks incredible in ways that matter given the injury he's coming off of. We'll see. If he's like that, I love Brooklyn. Milwaukee's Milwaukee. I talked about them. Philly got better. And Toronto, I'm keeping in the first tier because I just think if that backcourt is healthy, to have 2 guards that skilled and that tough with that much shooting ability, and Anunoby improving and Siakam finding his game after the bubble, I just don't think that team will drop that far in the regular season. Those guards are so good that I have faith in them. Then that's the end of my first tier. I have Indiana in its own tier as like, will they implode? Will they make trades? I don't even know. And I think Atlanta is closer to them than they are to the group below them. To me, Atlanta has accumulated enough talent that if they finish worse than 8th, it is a disappointment. Atlanta should be the big favorite, I think, for the number 8 seed, with a shot, if a couple of things go wrong above them and a couple of things go right for them, to chase 7. Doesn't get you out of the play-in tournament. I'd be a little surprised if they could chase 6. It would take some real stuff going wrong. And then I actually think if I had to pick the 3 most threatening teams behind them, I would pick Orlando just because of inertia. They should change their name to the Orlando Inertia for this year. They already have a singular name anyway, so they should, for 1 year, they should be called the Orlando Inertia. How much noise did we hear about they've reached the end of the road, it's time to pivot? Like, did they do anything? I don't even know what they did. They let DJ Augustine go. By the way, that's a big loss for them. Isaac is a huge loss for them. I think Atlanta's better than Orlando. I think Atlanta's better than Chicago. Chicago will get a big coaching bump, and I think just organizing that team in the correct way is worth a lot of wins. I think they're dangerous to the Hawks. The one team you didn't mention, I have them above Charlotte and others. I think the Wizards have the chance to be frisky. If they can find any defensive competency, I don't know if they're going to start Robin Lopez. Maybe that helps. Obviously, the John Wall thing is a huge wild card in every possible way. They have a lot of shooting. They have a decent amount of talent. They have improving talent in Troy Young and Hachimura. I think that team has a chance to be dangerous. I think Atlanta's better than them, but that's the team I look at in the rear view. I think I might even like them better than Orlando, just because you never know with a team like Orlando. Missing Isaac, so that means Al-Farouq Aminu is a huge part of their team now. the Augustine loss was big. Like their bench unit with Augustine and MCW as the backup guards was killing teams, and Augustine was a big part of that. Maybe Fultz makes another leap. I'm kind of a Fultz skeptic compared to the Magic anyway. I just don't. I just wonder if some of the veterans on that team feel the end of the roadness of it. Feel like the demoralization of, we kind of figured out what we are. We're not getting any better. This, that, and the other thing. I think the Hawks are good. I think that's my tiers. Did anything I just said strike you as interesting? You mentioned Washington. Are you a Wiz skeptic?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm pricing out John Wall. I do. All right, so best case scenario, to me, they're ranked 21st defensively. Okay, so what do you get from there? And that's just the thing. By the way, I love Bradley Beal. I think Brown's interesting. Obviously, Bertans can shoot the lights out. Lopez should stabilize at least something. But, I just don't know that there's depth and defense there enough to get them to a place where we're talking about them. Hey, maybe I'd be talking about them at 10th. I mean, hell, last season they finished, 9th or 10th? So I even if they maintain, they're in that conversation. But I just, to me, at the very basic level, when I'm trying to appraise a team, it's sort of like, where do I think where their offensive efficiency range is in terms of ranking? Where's their defensive efficiency ranking? And with them, I'm looking at the crystal ball and I see a 22, at best. I just think,
and then you got to be like,
I think they're sibs. I actually think they're sibs.
You got to be like 9th offensively, and they've actually fell to 16th. But obviously, the bubble killed them playing without Beal and Bertans. Their numbers. At one point, they were like the number 2 offense in the league for a little while. I just think Thomas Bryant's getting better. They have like, you could argue they have more depth than Philadelphia. Philadelphia's bench worries me a little bit. I think their starting 5 is going to be really strong, assuming they start Green and Curry around the 3 big salaried players, the 3 big stars that they have. But the bottom line is Atlanta should make the playoffs, and yes, they're gonna have 2 veteran players playing, let's say, 60 minutes a game between them that would otherwise go to their young players. And yeah, that compromises development, I guess, a little bit. It certainly compromises your cap situation going forward, but I don't think any compromise they have made in either realm, player development or cap management, really bothers me all that much. No. And I think they're going to be a legitimately good team. And by the way, if things click, kind of a fun first round playoff opponent if they get out of the play-in tournament.
Oh, I think in terms of we'll see your rankings of, fun to watch. They're going to be top 10. I mean, Bogdan is just electric. He is so much. I watch a ridiculous amount of Sacramento Kings basketball for someone who shouldn't watch it.
My condolences.
No, but last year it was less fulfilling than the previous season or two. But I mean, he's just fun. I mean, there's certain guys who just love the showmanship and the dramatic flair of hitting a big shot. And that guy just enjoys it. He wants to be the most theatrical player on the floor, for better and worse. Sometimes it's for worse, but Trey fits into that category. And, Collins is kind of freakish and on good nights.
I like John Collins.
Dumb.
I understand that, the idea that is he trapped between positions on defense is going to be a thing that dogs him throughout his career. And maybe that ends up being the case. Defensively, I think he improved his effort a little bit last year, and he was pretty open about improving his effort, and focus was step 1 for him. He was pretty open about, I hadn't really dug in enough on defense before that. I thought he got a little better. Intuitively, I don't think the rhythms of defense come to him as easily as you'd like. But offensively, he's a freaking monster. 40% from 3, and I believe his numbers were pretty even corner versus above the break longer threes. Got better in the post last year, which I really think, I just still think every big man, if you're going to play in the playoffs, you just have to be able to do something when they switch a guard onto you. It's still important. Playoff defenses are too good and they take away too much stuff that if you're a 7-footer or a 6'10" guy who's skilled and you just can't do anything, I still think you as much as the post up is out of style, and he got better at that. To me, that's how, that's where the league at large watched Miles Turner be able to do nothing against Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero in the post, it was like, ooh, it's kind of a problem. So I'm still in on John Collins. I understand I understand the question marks, but the guy is prodigiously talented on offense.
Offensive, and again, I mean, look, facing up one dribble, he's a great threat. I mean, there's a lot he can do to pressure defenses, and I love him. It is, though, I think at some point there are defensive liability. I mean, that's going to be, as this team grows, that's always going to be sort of the great torment for whether, for the coaching staff, which is, how do we balance these liabilities? Can we find, we'll be saying things like, name one guy, how many guys in the Hawks can we say in earnest are above average, both offensively and defensively? And I think there's just going to be a lot of trade-offs on that team. Hunter is just, I think, a potential all-NBA defender. He just has no offensive feel, yet he's smart, right? Like Reddish, to me, will be the answer to that question. Collins will probably always be a negative. So we'll constantly be having that conversation where, who do you want on the floor? In the early career, Thomas Epilosha or Harden, when Harden was like still young and coming off the bench, right? Like that. What do you substitute? We'll see a lot of offensive defense, not just in the last 5 minutes, but matchup to matchup. But hey, who cares? Now, the one person who cares, I think, is management and coaching staff are both on the line. Like, they need to perform this year, the team, barring extenuating circumstances. The entire team falls victim to, COVID. There are always extenuating circumstances. But I do think there is an imperative in Atlanta. It's time. It's time you do this. We've given you material support. We're not a cheapo team. Go do this. You've had a blank check, essentially. And by the way, I think they will. And that's the good news. And I do think they will.
They're also low-key almost certainly out of future first-round picks. They picked up a lot of picks in salary dumps over the years, which I think was smart. In some cases, I think the bang for the buck wasn't ideal. Like, they took on a lot of money for a middling first or a 30th pick in one case. But it's like, fine, those aren't perfect. But, they traded one of the extra firsts for Capella. That first went on quite a journey, by the way. In 1 year, that first-round pick went from the Nets to the Hawks in the Allen Crabbe salary dump that the Nets used to open up the Kyrie KD space. The Hawks to the Wolves in the 17 team trade for Capella, and then the Wolves to the Thunder in the Rubio deal, and it became the mystery man Pokusevski, who's going to the Thunder now. They traded 2 firsts and a second to get DeAndre Hunter, which is probably one thing about the Travis Schlenk regime. Like, he's not afraid to sort of lose the asset valuation part of a trade if it's something he really wants to do. So that was one where they probably, by the numbers, overpaid 8, 17, and 35, I think, went to New Orleans to move up and get Hunter, but he wanted DeAndre Hunter. We'll see how it works out. The one future first they still have coming to them is the first they got for taking on Carmelo Anthony's salary, and that deal, in retrospect, they gave up Schroeder and took on Carmelo's $27 million expiring, and got a first-round pick that Oklahoma City, just fiendish. Sam Presti's just fiendish. It's lottery protected. It's lottery protected in 1 year, 2022. I got news for you. Oklahoma City's going to be in the lottery in 2022. You're not getting that pick. And it doesn't get any, and after that, it's 2 second-round picks. You get one shot at it. Sam Presti pioneered this concept in the Jeremy Grant trade. It's just fiendish. And so it's not going to be a future first. It could be two future seconds. So they've used up all of their picks on players and trades and stuff. So this is the sort of team going forward. I think it's a good, exciting team. And with proper development from their young players in 2-3 years, when Gallinari is cycling out and Bogdanovic is, maybe the veteran that you decide to keep or whatever he is, like, they could be a really good team. It hasn't been, again, the Luka thing hovers over it. Some of those trades, again, were the bang for the buck wasn't great, but like, if those young wings develop, this could be a really interesting team.
You mentioned something really interesting about Schlenk as a builder, right? Like, I think there are a lot of GMs, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to this. Let's accumulate talent. I don't really particularly care about the profile of that talent. Yes, there are players I like, there are players I don't like based on scouting and insight. Schlenk is a guy who wants a particular kind of player. He imagines a specific composition, right? Like, Hunter was very much an expression of that. Hey, we have Trey. Harder at the time was still, I think it was central to their plans, Collins. and we need a big spidery wing stopper. We'll figure out where he is offensively, and that's what we have development for. But, he imagines sort of, okay, this is a future lineup, and each of these guys services a function schematically in that lineup. Whereas there are other GMs who are just like, hey, look, get the talent. We'll worry about composition later. All of these guys are mysteries. There is no, this is more of a dark art than a science. And, it's been an interesting process, right? Because he missed on some, and he also managed the spreadsheet very well and hit on some. I mean, Collins is just a great pick. So he's an interesting builder.
Yeah, and I think that race for 7, 6, 8, 9, whatever it is going to be interesting. And, I just wanted to talk briefly again about Chicago because I do think this is Billy Donovan's first year. I still worry a little bit about the total playmaking they have there. Like, Zach LaVine as a lead playmaker isn't going to work. Zach LaVine's a tremendous offensive player. Just I don't want him to be my lead pick and roll guy anymore. Kobe White took some of that mantle toward the end of last season. TBD on that. Satoransky is just kind of but I do think Markkanen and Carter will have a bounce back year. People seem to love this Pat Williams guy they drafted at 4. I think if they can get anything out of Otto Porter and Thad Young, I think they have a chance to be sneaky dangerous at the bottom of the playoff race. But the Hawks, I do think, walk in as favorites to get one of the top 2 seeds in the play-in tournament. I can't believe the play-in tournament is going to become a thing.
Oh,
I love the play-in tournament.
Yeah, I think you and I have the same reservations, and the note I have here is sort of like shot creation for the Bulls, right? Like I just am suspicious of any team where where Zach LaVine is sort of the catalyst there, right? Like because I don't think White is there yet, and I like White. I like White. I feel badly about Porter. It was the hip, it was the foot. I don't even think it's. No fault of his, and some guys just get unlucky. I feel like it was like Gary Harris for a year or two, right? Like, but I just want to see Markkanen and Carter on the floor together, and
in a real offensive system, in a real
offensive system that understands where to get those shots and when to get those shots for those guys. The right shot in the right spot. Where is the pure shot creation? Temple will stabilize them off the bench. They'll tread water in their second unit, particularly if Young is sort of back there. They'll be able to do something. I think you and I both have an appreciation for Satoransky, but I just like, where is the shot creation coming from? Like who is going to burst off a pick and roll?
Well, it's the same reservation I have about Fultz, where like Fultz is super skilled. Satoransky is super skilled. They're both smart players. Fultz has great vision. There just is like an upper bound that's not all that high when the defense can go under every single pick against you and not be afraid to do it. And like, that's my Fultz skepticism. Like, yeah, I think he maximized and he shot like 46% or something on mid-range jumpers last year. He shot 77 or something from the line, which is a great sign. But those 46% on mid-range jumpers, like a Dirk 46% and a Fultz 46% are wildly different things. Those are conceded, wide open, red carpet, take it, we don't care jumpers. And I just it's the same thing with Satoransky. Like he's a better shooter than Markelle and has had some good 3-point shooting seasons, but no one is afraid of ducking under his screens. And that just it's just so hard to generate, it's so hard to compromise the defense when that happens. Anyway, so we're both optimistic.
Yeah, and that's probably it's exactly what you just said. Is probably why I'm a little higher on Charlotte than you are. Like, these are flawed players. It's not a perfect, compositionally a perfect sort of roster. But wow, Devontae Graham can get a shot. Gordon Hayward can get a shot. Terry Rozier can kind of get a shot. Like, we'll see about LaMelo. I don't think Bridges is terrible.
No, I think Washington and Bridges are pretty good. It's just their depth.
I like PJ Washington a lot, yeah.
Their depth at the 4 and 5 worry me a little bit. As good as PJ Washington was last year, the depth behind them worries me a little bit. Their depth in general worries me, and like, that they're going to turn over a lot of the offense to LaMelo, no matter the veterans they have around him, and just rookie point guards tend to be really, really bad. But I agree with you. There is the skeleton of an interesting team, and I also agree with you that James Borrego is a good coach who will squeeze every W out of that team that they can get. So I maybe I should elevate them into that Washington, Chicago tier. But we both agree on the Hawks. I think the Hawks, I think they had a good offseason. Is it an A plus? Is it no? But it's hard to get an A plus when you're in a market that's not one of the marquee ones and you're trying to win now. I like what they did.
One day it will be, Zach Lowe. Atlanta, Georgia will be a marquee market at some point. It will go back to the days of the chiclet seats at the Omni that I grew up in. It is just, I'm so ready for the Hawks to matter again. I mean, it was this beautiful fleeting moment during the Budenholzer 60 win kind of period. But, that was an older team, and it wasn't, you didn't see it in the distance. And
they got decent, with the exception of, I think they missed a chance to trade Millsap, and the Horford, Dwight Howard thing didn't work out. But, like, they got good value for Teague. They got good value for Korver, although that's another first that turned into multiple seconds that New Orleans now owns. But I thought hard to rebuild from a team like that without bottoming out. I thought they got okay value for the most part. But anyway, so we will have to have you back on. I was going to say, as the season approaches, the season is approaching. Players are coming back to camp tomorrow. And
Wednesday?
As the season is approaching, we will do our annual 5 Most Confusing Teams podcast. I think this is going to be a fun year for that particular podcast, given the short turnaround and the level of player movement that just happened all at once. I think that'll be fun. Kevin Arnovitz, it's good to hear your voice again. Stay safe out there. Enjoy Howard the Golden Retriever. I hope he doesn't tear up your house, my friend.
We are prepared. Thanks for having me.
All right, now I'm really excited. Let's bring on a first-time guest who just wrote one of the best feature stories on the NBA in a long time, from Turner, Bleacher Report, host of Take It There with Taylor Rooks. It's Taylor Rooks. How are you?
I am doing amazing. Just happy to be here. Happy to be, not in a bubble anymore and enjoying my time in New York.
Well, that's the story. The story is, and I've been waiting for someone to write this story super well, and you were in the bubble for a long time. We can talk about that. And the story ran in GQ last week. First of all, writing in GQ, that's just cool. Like, it's cool.
I was super pumped. Yeah, I was super pumped. When it happened, I'm like, oh my gosh, are you serious? I'm gonna have a byline in that magazine. I definitely had a little minor freak out session, and then I was like, all right, how am I gonna get this done? So, but it was really cool to be in there, and I now have like a hard print copy of the George Clooney cover, which is also very cool. And to flip and see it in there was definitely a highlight of my career.
Yeah, George Clooney is a handsome man. I feel comfortable. It's a handsome man. The story is called The Most Magical Place on Earth Inside the Great NBA Bubble Experiment by Taylor Rooks. And I just wanted to say, it's rare to find a story that has the level of reporting that this story has. Like, there are just too many amazing details in this story about the funky, fun, moving, heartbreaking intricacies of living in that bubble for both you and the players. There are just too many to even come close to mentioning on this podcast. That, combined with the humanity of it, the humanity of getting these guys to talk about their support systems and how important it was for them to have those support systems. Mm-hmm. Your personal support system, the way you changed the way you kind of interacted with some players to ask them about George Floyd and Jacob Blake. Just the humanity, the combination of humanity and deep reporting is, I think, very, very rare, and you pulled it off in one piece. It was really just a joy to read. And congratulations. It's a great story.
Thank you so much. It's so funny because when I was writing it, every time I would do the interview, I would say to the player or the coach or the GM, whatever, I'd say, you know what? I really want this story to be told through anecdotes. I want the story to be told through experience and things that happened to you. So as detailed as you can be, even if it feels very small to you, like that's the stuff that will really make the story. And, I think sometimes when you're writing, you want to find that one thing that like nobody knows, and it's going to be like the bombshell part of your story. But for me, I think it was more like these little things that nobody knew. Like there wasn't just this grandiose thing like this person almost went to this team and that's what happened in the bubble. No, it was like what people were doing when they hung out and the conversations that they had. And so I just kind of tried to follow that path as I did it.
Let me give a couple of good examples just to whet people's appetite. Number one, I was absolutely rolling at the idea that Masai Ujiri was staying one floor above Kawhi Leonard, exactly one floor above him, and waking Kawhi Leonard up from his sleep, I guess, by going on Peloton at 5 a.m. So so when you find I assume you found that out from Masai because Kawhi doesn't talk. So when you find that, do you say, hey, can I use that? Or that's so, because certainly a light bulb goes off in your head like, oh, that's a good one.
Totally. So this is the thing with that story. That was one that I would try to ask every person. I would say, tell me the best story from the bubble that nobody knows. That was a question that I asked everybody at the end of each interview. And Masai goes, I'm gonna think on it. I gotta really think on it. He's like, can I get back to you? I'm like, sure, absolutely. So then the next day I text him, I'm like, hey, have you thought about that story? And he says, well, there's this thing that happened with Kawhi. And then he tells me the story. So it's like, and that's an example of people not always realizing why something will be so good. But yeah, he said that I guess Kawhi asked Kyle Lowry who was staying in that room because every day that person was waking him up. So that's when Kawhi sent the text. So that's how that one came about.
And then, of course, they talk trash about how when the Raptors and Clippers play in the finals, Masai's going to screw up Kawhi's sleep, have random workouts all through the night.
Yes, and then Kawhi says, don't make me call the NBA on you and get you kicked out the bubble. So it was a really nice story.
So, and another one that I'll highlight for people. We'll get to the serious ones later, but I just loved the Rockets and the Blazers, rival teams with Damian Lillard and Russell Westbrook, who have a history now, sitting poolside, everybody watching on their iPads a Mavericks-Clippers playoff game, but realizing that one of the team's feeds was 3 seconds ahead of the other team so that they would start reacting to stuff and the other team would be like, wait, what's it? And then they all decided, let's just forget that and watch it all together.
Yes.
First of all, I had a college buddy who would do that to me all the time. I'm old. I graduated college in 1999. We'd be watching basketball games together over the phone and his feed would be 3 seconds ahead of mine and he would be like, oh my God, he made a half-court shot. And if he didn't make a half-court shot, he would just be toying with me. That's just such a great detail that I can visualize, and it will probably maybe never happen again. It seems mundane. It seemed mundane to the players, but as soon as I read it, I was like, that's an Orlando thing. I'm so glad I know that.
Totally, because one thing that was happening in the bubble was there was so much just fellowship and congregating with different players on different teams. And a lot of it would happen at the bar or at the pool. So I thought it was really important to just kind of let people know the role that the pool played. I know in the Grandestino, everybody would call that pool Cabo because it kind of looked like it had a pyramid and it was really fancy over there. And there would always be players just meeting there to just hang out. Even if they didn't get in, it was just they would get drinks and they'd hang out at the pool. And then it was there was this other world at the other hotels and this other pool. And that's where the Rockets and the Blazers were, where they were watching that game together. So I just feel like there was different places in the bubble that were also characters, and the pool was one of them. So it was nice to add that in there.
So when you got there, did you know from the beginning, I want to write a story like this and begin compiling stuff right away? Did you take notes yourself and did you keep a journal, or was this something that halfway through you're like, wow, I've heard a lot of fun stuff. Let me make something out of this. How did it start?
Yeah. So I definitely didn't know going in I was going to write a piece for GQ. But I did say to myself going in that when I would remember at every night, I wanted to write exactly what happened so I didn't forget. Because there is such a small amount of people that were in that bubble and such a small amount of people that can tell others what it was like. So in years from now, when there's that documentary or that movie or that book, whatever, you can only ask so many people about the experience. So I wanted to be as prepared as possible for when that time inevitably came. So I would try to remember to write what happened. I was vlogging for Bleacher Report, which was really cool because I just have so much footage of different things, which will help jog my memory as well. But I would just hear in passing so many little tidbits and see who guys were hanging out with and know that there was some type of story there. And one day, literally it was maybe 3 weeks before I had to leave the bubble, GQ reached out and was like, we have really enjoyed the reporting that you have been doing in Orlando. We're doing this Men of the Year issue. We want to do something on the bubble. Would you be down to write it? keep in mind, I started off as a writer. I was writing when I was in college, but I haven't written something in so long. Definitely not something that was 5,000 words. So once they asked me, I really started just trying to figure out what I felt like that story looked like, but more importantly, what I thought that story felt like. And so that was just in my mind for the rest of the weeks. But yeah, I did not go in knowing that I would be writing this story.
Well, it's a beautiful story and it's structured beautifully. We'll talk about the way it ends later at the end, because the kicker is just absolutely pitch perfect. Now, on a lighthearted note, you have now forever tainted my experience of watching one player because of this story. When I go to a game and this player is playing, I'm going to be focusing on him at the beginning before the game, and I will never ever George Hill. You guessed it right away. Your story revealed to me that, and this is forever. I'm like, this is going to be years of my life going to now. I don't even know what team he plays for. The Thunder now. At 6 minutes before tip off, George Hill will leave the layup line and go relieve himself in the bathroom as a ritual before every game. So this means I'm going to be watching the freaking layup line every game to make sure that I see George Hill. And if he doesn't do it, I'm going to be like, oh, he's going to have a bad game. So like, you mix these little lighthearted things. So when you hear that, are you like, are you sure you want me to print that? I mean, George is pretty candid
No, I was like, I have to print this. So obviously when he had missed the anthem, everyone was like, okay, why'd you miss the anthem? There was all these theories. And he said, well, I missed the anthem because I was taking a shit. And when I heard him say that, I'm like, all right, there's some follow-ups here. Like, he was taking this shit. Is he always taking this shit? So when I knew I was going to interview him for the story, I'm like, what we need to talk about above all else is this routine. And I'm telling you, there is a story to be told about different player routines because he does it. I've talked to Channing Frye about it, and he said that when he played, he could not play unless he took a big dump before the game. And then there was a lot of Cavaliers that did it. A lot of players feel like they have to poop before the games. It's like makes them lighter. They move better. Like, I'm telling you, there is something there in that story. People have very specific routines.
So you're telling me Channing Frye does this.
Yep.
A lot of the Cavaliers did it. So the 2016 Cavaliers rally from a 3-1 deficit to win the title. And you hear all these stories about how Channing Frye really changed the team's culture in a midseason trade. They have this puzzle where after every game, they have this ritual where they're putting a puzzle piece into the puzzle. And really all it comes down to was somehow they all discovered we all need to go to the bathroom before the game. This is why they won the championship.
Yes, everyone had to poop. Yes, yeah. Channing was like, I would poop before every game, but it was like, he was like, it's a thing everybody does. Everybody poops before they go out. And that was something that was news to me. And I definitely needed to delve into that a little more. So
this actually, I think personally that I think George Hill is like 2% better as a player now that I know this. Like this has improved my view of George Hill as a player. Let's talk about that meeting after the Bucks went on strike, and then it triggered strikes all around sports. They have the players only, well, it's players and coaches, and then it became players only meeting.
Yeah,
I thought I knew everything about that meeting, both on the record and off the record. I was texting people, calling people, and I knew that John Lucas had given a speech that had stirred emotion in a lot of people there. You taught me months later now something about that speech that I didn't know that really kind of hit me in the gut a little bit when I read it. Can you tell people what that was?
Yeah. So both CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony are ones who really pointed to the speech as an important part of the meeting where I guess John Lucas started talking about what the bubble does to players mentally and essentially said that so much of what there is to do is just drink, and eventually people will become alcoholics. And he also talked about his struggle with alcoholism in that speech. And it was something that I think really hit home for a lot of people. CJ said everybody stood up, gave him a standing ovation, clap, because they all just really understood that there was only so much that you could do in this bubble. And now this isn't what any of the players said. This is just something that I always thought about is just based on pure numbers, right? Pure statistics of people. there is somebody who struggles with some type of addiction that was in that bubble, whatever it is, like you don't know what it is, but there's some type of addiction that somebody has in that bubble. And they wouldn't be able to, appease that there. And I wonder how many people really did struggle with whatever that thing was and not having it. And whether that, I guess, maybe helped them in any way. But I think that the John Lucas speech really did hit home for a lot of people.
Well, you also just hear people talk about it in regular non-NBA bubble life, that, the pandemic is like, people are stuck at home. It's stressful financially. It's stressful, emotionally. The virus has touched, if not someone's immediate family, certainly one level away. And you hear people joke, like I have friends who are joke, I'm up to a couple of glasses of wine every night now. The pandemic's going to turn me into an alcoholic before you know it. And you laugh because we all laugh, we all deal with it. But it's like, actually, it might actually be a real concern. That's
how you form habits. I mean, that really is, how these things, I feel like, build up and happen. And I wanted to also balance, because, in the story, I talk a lot about how, wine and drinks served as fellowship. I thought it was really important to also highlight the other side of what that stuff could lead to as well. So, John's moment was big for a lot of people.
You also, you found a way, and this was challenging for, I think, a lot of reporters, is, players wanted to talk about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Jacob Blake. They didn't want to talk about basketball a lot. And so you would have these press conferences where they would announce, I'm not taking any basketball questions, or they would answer every question by saying, we want justice for Breonna Taylor. And that was tough for a lot of reporters, I think, to navigate. And you navigated it by just going head on. Tell me what you feel. How are you doing today in the wake of all this news? And I think the first moment that it landed on people's radar in a big way was when Jonathan Isaac stood for the national anthem and did not wear the Black Lives Matter T-shirt. And you asked him, I don't want to misquote you, but you asked him something to the effect of like, do you think that Black Lives Matter, or something to that nature, right? So remind me what the question was. And then the reaction was pretty explosive, but like it was a very direct question that got a direct answer from him.
Right. And that's exactly what I wanted to ask him, a direct question so that he could give a direct answer. And I felt like there was this one kind of corner of the internet that wasn't really understanding the context of why I asked him that question. I want to first say, and I feel like I've been very open about this, you should be able to do whatever you want for the anthem. Like if you want to kneel, if you want to stand, like literally do whatever you want. Like people shouldn't police what someone does for the anthem. So in that situation, Jonathan Isaacs was standing for the anthem, but he also wasn't wearing the Black Lives Matter shirt, where there was tons of people stood for the anthem, but they had also worn the Black Lives Matter shirt, which to me signaled they were saying, I don't want to kneel, but I'm saying that I support this movement, right? Whether it was Popovich or Hammond or Myers Leonard, they stood, but they wore the shirt. So when he was standing, but also not wearing the shirt, I think there was confusion as to like, okay, so wait, I know you want to stand, but are you also not going with the movement, right? And so I know that things can be lost in translation. I know that doing that doesn't necessarily mean that. So when I asked him the question, I honestly just wanted him to be able to say why he didn't wear the shirt. And was it because you don't necessarily believe in that Black Lives Matter movement? And he said he did, and that was that. There was no, obviously, why would I want him to say no? You know what I mean? That isn't at all what I was trying to elicit. I really just wanted him to be able to explain himself and why he did, because that's what everybody was talking about on the internet, was why was he not wearing the shirt? So then he answered, and I asked him, and I said, sorry, I just want to ask a follow-up question. I really am just trying to understand. This isn't in any way to attack. I just want to get it. I said that. I was like, can you explain the role that religion plays in terms of, fighting for racial equality and
Jonathan Isaac is an ordained minister, for context.
Yes. And in his answer about the Black Lives Matter movement, he referenced religion as why he didn't. So I think the natural follow-up to that is, can you just explain that connection? So I asked him that. So yeah, there was definitely a corner of the internet that was not happy with that question, but I wasn't really looking for anybody to be happy or unhappy. I just wanted to ask the question. That's what everybody online was thinking. And so I just wanted to ask. I mean, I kind of got end of the stick because they asked me to go first. So I asked the first question.
Hey, look, it's more interesting than, than how did you think you played today, or how was your rebounding today, or whatever.
And that was something in the bubble that I really enjoyed and took some adjusting to is, these were scrum environments. Somebody was up there, it was a bunch of reporters, you're asking your question, but I'm used to doing one-on-one interviews. Like I don't always go to the locker room and ask the question. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask all of these questions the same way I would ask if it was just us. Like I didn't want to adapt my questions to like that scrum environment. I didn't want to say, like, how'd you feel during this game, or what was the message? Like I wanted to ask the questions that I would have asked any other time. And I guess, some people saw that one a way different than I did.
Well, and in this story, you talk about how the day after the Jacob Blake shooting, you could tell Fred VanVleet was just kind of shaken up, and, he's getting basketball questions, and you just asked him, hey, you seem, a little shaken up or whatever. How are you doing? And you got a real answer from him. And I think fans were interested in the answers to those questions and remain interested in the answers to those non-basketball questions. You also, in the story, get into the dynamic. And again, it's a very touchy subject of that players' meeting. Mm-hmm. You get into the dynamic that emerged between players who were concerned about the financial ramifications of sitting out the rest of the season versus those who were less concerned. And it's an awkward thing to bring up because some players make $30 million a year and some players make $1 million a year, which is a lot of money, but it's also, it's not 30. And so, and you have this amazing quote from George Hill talking about, remembering that meeting and saying, well, what does money matter to you if you don't have your humanity, or if you're, and that's another gut punch, and to have that kind of story and the other George Hill story in the same magazine feature is an unusual thing. The one other one I wanted to hit on is, clearly you talk to Masai Ujiri a lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could just sort of relate to people what he told you about watching and then sharing the video of the police officer in Oakland, or whatever his title was, shoving him away from the court and all that. Because I had not heard him really talk about that kind of stuff very much. Can you just sort of say what he said?
For sure. I mean, well, first, he tells me that he first, was alerted about this video going to be coming out, and seeing the video when he was like on the bus. I can't remember if it was to or from a game, but he saw it on the bus, watched it in his room, told his wife. He then knew that the players were going to see it, but he wanted to be the one to show them. So he showed them. He said that Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet were just so upset when they saw the video. And those were, two of the guys that really just like came up to him and expressed how angry they were. He also said he showed Doc Rivers, and Doc Rivers was just so angry. He started saying, this isn't right. People need to see this. This isn't right. And they had this like moment where Doc was just like trying to be there for him. It was just really, shook by seeing that and being like, they tried to say that you did something that you did not. He just kept saying, everybody needs to see this. Everybody needs to see this. And yeah, I think Masai, just so much happened to Masai in the bubble. To have to go through that on the backdrop of everything that America is going through and deal with it when you're in this secluded space, like, I think was a lot. But Masai just added so much to the story because of what we saw happen to him at that championship. He's in a lot of ways like the embodiment, right, of what we have all been fighting for in the bubble and everywhere else. So he was a crucial part.
And you describe him weeping, showing this video to his family, to some of his players, like weeping openly. And it's like, you just don't see that side of a powerful team president. He has such sort of a cocksure personality. He's very confident and outgoing. I'm trying to picture what that looks like in my head. Yeah. And it's a hard image to get.
And that's why, when I say in there that I remember distinctly sitting outside of the Raptors practice and Masai just walking up so unprompted and just being like, we should have never come to the bubble. And it was like, and that was the same day as Fred, right? It was when everybody was thinking about Jacob Blake. And I just remember being like, this is hitting Masai differently because of, obviously what he went through as well. So Masai was super emotional and open and candid about everything that he felt. He told me this, this whole thing about how he felt when he watched the George Floyd video and the Jacob Blake video. And he said that, so much of the focus that we are putting on change is about racism. And yes, that is absolutely the problem. So much of the problem really is humanity. He was like, that's a lack of humanity to put your knee on someone's neck for that long. Like, what we should be talking about is what type of person would do that. And so, I probably talked to Masai for, in total, because I did 2 interviews with him, I probably talked to him for 2 hours. And he was great. Like, probably the most valuable interview. Which is funny because I wouldn't say that I almost didn't interview him, but I was like, I wasn't thinking he was going to play the role that he did in it. You know what I mean? Like, when you're thinking about who you want to talk to, like, Masai was on there, but mainly because I wanted him to talk about, the video. But he lent so many other things, whether it was the DeMar DeRozan story or the Kawhi story, like, all of that was so important. And so I think one thing that I learned from writing this was, you should always do the interview. If you don't use anything from it, you don't use anything from it, but you should always at least do it and see where it takes you, because that's absolutely what happened with Masai.
Well, I don't want to spoil any more of it. There is a Masai, you just hinted at it, there is a Masai reunion story that is also sort of worth the price of admission on its own. There's a Russell Westbrook, Chris Paul story in it that is a really fun detail. And there's also, a lot of the story is about the players being there for each other. Like, Ja Morant misses his daughter's first words, and Chris Paul references a saying about, I have to remind myself, check on my strong friends, not just my fragile friends, but the strongest ones, because they may need help and I may not think that. I thought that was very moving. So please, everybody, read the story. I'm not spoiling any more of it for you. Go read it. Taylor, what's the best story that is on the cutting room floor? What's your favorite story that you couldn't squeeze in or whatever?
Well, I want to start off by saying my first draft was like 8,000 words. And it had to become it ended up being, I think, like 5,400 or something like that. So a lot was taken out. I would say it's more nuggets than it is stories. Like, when I spoke to Danny Green, obviously you see in the story, he referenced, the night where he missed the shot and everybody was killing him online. There was a tweet from Devontae Adams that had gone viral that night about Danny Green. They actually FaceTimed that night, which I thought was really great. He said he found a lot of comfort in Devontae just giving him some words. Jason Tatum, I asked a lot of players, like, if there were guys that they left the bubble feeling closer to. And Jason Tatum said that there was a night that he sat and just talked to Montrez for like 2 hours. And they became really cool from that. I feel like I'm missing maybe something else. Bam told me a story about, obviously, Jimmy Butler and the coffee. And I was like, well, like, have you had the coffee? He's like, no. He said, I want to be a part owner. I'm not going to try the coffee until I'm a part owner. And I said, well, I assume that's not happening. And Bam said, well, Jimmy said I could be a part owner for $2.5 million. And I said, I assume that you didn't take that offer. He's like, no. So I haven't had the coffee, which I thought was funny.
See, the young athletes, they've all learned from LeBron. Take the equity. Don't just become a sponsor. Take the equity,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I think those are the ones that really stick out to me. Doc Rivers told me a story, actually, that the year that Obama was running for president, he was in the middle of a game as the election was being called. And he looks over to his right, and there's like a black couple, and the woman is crying. And he looks at the woman and he's like, what's wrong? Like, is she okay? Is she okay? And her husband, assuming is her husband, goes, yeah, she's okay. Barack Obama just won. So Doc Rivers calls a timeout for like literally no reason, but calls a timeout, has his team come over and tells them that Barack Obama won the presidency. That didn't make it in the story, but I thought that was a really, really nice story as well.
I'm glad it made this podcast. Last one. You made an art form of playing heads up with the players. I love heads up. I don't think I'm being immodest. I think I'm quite good at heads up. I think I'm a very good heads up player. Yes. Who was the best and who was the worst at heads up?
I will say, honestly, that was one of my favorite things I did in the bubble was that, like, the heads up. We did these compilations. It was really, really fun. I would say there was two best. Kemba, even though his clues were a bit unorthodox, he was good. He was really
you have
good.
a Kemba line. I had forgotten about Kemba. Kemba's description of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was they be flying on brooms and
yeah.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't necessarily lead me to the first book. Like, I need a little more information to get to the first book. That's all the books.
I am like a Harry Potter stan. So I just ripped through all the books. And he's like, that one. And it worked. But yes, that was his clue for Harry Potter. JJ Redick was very good. So I say Kimba and JJ were the best. Maybe Kelly Oubre third best. Worst by far was Josh Hart. He was not good. Jamal Murray was also very good as well. But JJ and Kemba stick out the most for the best, and Josh Hart sticks out the most for the worst. But sorry, I said Jamal Murray, and there's actually just one thing I want to say, if you would allow me to, because I think that's important. So for the story, I interviewed Jamal, and he was fantastic. We talked a lot about why he was able to thrive in the bubble, what made the Nuggets special, his interview, because those were vital to the bubble, and they were great stories, and they were, I think they, like I said, they were really, really important. And I know that when some people saw the illustration for the bubble and when they read the story, they said, okay, well, Jamal Murray's only in here once, and there's no Nuggets in this illustration, even though the Nuggets are in the Western Conference Finals. I think all of that is so fair.
You're talking about the illustration that accompanies the story.
Yes.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah, there's 20 players who are probably in Nuggets.
And no Nuggets. Now, and I think that is so fair. And granted, I obviously didn't do the illustration, so that's not my thing. I love the illustration. I think he did a fantastic job.
It's cool.
But I do want to say that when I was writing the story, I talked to a lot of my friends who are writers. And one thing that we kept on saying is that you got to let the story tell itself to you. So I came in here thinking I was going to have this big chunk about what basketball was like in the bubble and players that played well and their stats, their differences between out bubble and the bubble. I was like thinking that was the story. But the more I did these interviews, the more I talked to guys, like the story just wasn't about basketball. And so a lot of Jamal's stuff ended up not being in there, not because Jamal wasn't fantastic, because he was, but because we saw what happened on the court, but we didn't see a lot of what happened off the court. And I felt like that was the heartbeat of the story. So for those that felt a way about there not being a lot of Nuggets in there or not being a lot of Suns in there, that is so fair. But I just want people to know that I did speak to Jamal at length. And I did still put him in the story, just not in the way that I envisioned him to be. So I just think that that's maybe something that happens with writing, and you just got to figure out like what is the heartbeat of this story. And I felt like it was all of those other little off the court anecdotes.
Rank the Harry Potter books best to worst right now, Taylor Rooks. Under the gun.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I am going to say Deathly Hallows Part 1.
There's full stop. There's only one. There's no part 1. That's the movies.
I know,
but Deathly Hallows is just a book.
I know, but I did the movies because most people see in the movie. So I'll say Deathly Hallows.
Okay.
I'll say Deathly Hallows. Then I say Order of the Phoenix, Half-Blood Prince, Goblet of Fire, Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, Sorcerer's Stone.
So Chamber of Secrets is underrated. I'm glad that you put it in the middle there. Chamber of Secrets is underrated.
I love Chamber of Secrets.
I go 5, 6, 4 are my top 3. So Order of Phoenix,
Half-Blood Prince, Goblet of Fire.
Are my top 3. Someday I'll reread 7. The last one. I remember not loving it as much as I thought that I should.
I loved it.
The afterword is problematic. On a number of levels.
It's so funny because with Harry Potter, like when I was younger, there was this bookstore near my house called Books A Million. And every time a new Harry Potter book was coming out, they would throw a party at midnight. So I'd make my mom take me. You bring her a sleeping bag. You wait. There's like people dressed up acting at Harry Potter scenes, and you buy the book at midnight. I would go home and finish the book in like 2 days. Like, I love Harry Potter. I want to reread them. I really, really do.
Well, my daughter is too young to listen to this podcast, so hopefully she'll never hear it. But I think 25% of the reason I became a parent was to go to have an excuse to go to theme parks and read Harry Potter books as an adult. 25% was to embarrass her or any other child I might have in the future. Like, I'm definitely going to be an embarrassing dad who like, bye honey, I'll see you, I love you so much, and drop off. And then like 50% is like love and affection and like starting a family and all that stuff.
Just that's some of it. Yeah. Okay,
like
wait, I have a question for you before you go, because there's two things I'm passionate about in terms of like entertainment. Harry Potter and The Wire. Have you seen The Wire?
The Wire is my all-time favorite television show.
Okay, I'm going to rank my seasons for The Wire, and I would hope we're on the same page with this, okay?
Hold on. I just want to think for a second. Okay, go.
By far, season 4 is number 1. So I go 4, 3, 1, 2, 5.
Can you see that? You can't see that. 4, 3, 1, 2, 5. I just wrote it down.
Yes, see? Look, I knew I liked you. And let me tell you why I respect that list so much. I don't respect anyone who put season 2 last.
Season 2 is underrated. Season 2, I've told this before, so I binged The Wire. And I had been prepared by people, you're not going to like season 2. Just get through it. You just got to get through it. And I watched it and I was like, this is awesome. What are people talking about? Like,
so
this is a huge part of the show.
Yeah. And like David Simon at one point, he says like season 2, it had to show people that like it's bigger than just Baltimore. Like, you have to show that. So I think it really is necessary to the fabric of the show. Have you read All the Pieces Matter, that oral history?
I had, and I have had Jonathan Abrams on the podcast to talk about it.
Oh my God. Like, okay, see, look, we're right here. I love it.
All right. So everybody, you got to go. Everybody needs to read this story. Taylor Rooks in GQ. Let me read the title again. I have to scroll down. The most magical place on earth inside the great NBA bubble experiment. Congratulations. It's a beautiful story. People can follow your work at Turner and Bleacher. Taylor Rooks, thank you for making some time for us.
Thank you so much for having me.